AITA for cutting off my brother after he slept with my girlfriend and mocked me for it? Hi, I'm 29. My brother, Brandon, is 26. We grew up pretty normal, at least until high school, when the favoritism started to become much more noticeable. You see, Brandon was always the charismatic one, the guy who could talk his way out of any situation, make friends instantly, and somehow convince people his nonsense was brilliant. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the one who showed up, did the work, and got things done without needing a parade for it. Our parents weren't over the top with the favoritism, but it was there. Brandon got away with more, because that's just how he is, and I was expected to be the mature older brother who understood. And I did understand. I understood that being reliable meant you got taken for granted, while being a charming opportunist got you excuses. After college, I landed a good job as a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company here in Austin. Nothing fancy, but good pay, a stable career, benefits, the whole package. I bought a decent 2-bedroom condo when I was 26. It wasn't a penthouse, but it was mine, paid for with my own money and my own hard work. Brandon, on the other hand, bounced from one thing to another. He tried being a personal trainer for 6 months. Then he got obsessed with crypto day trading and lost a bunch of money. After that, he decided he was going to be a club promoter, then a freelance photographer. Every few months, it was a new passion that was definitely going to be the one that made him take off. And every time it all fell apart, who do you think he came to for money? Exactly me, the reliable ATM. I helped him out more times than I should have. I covered his rent twice when his photography gigs dried up. I lent him $3,000 for work equipment that I never saw again. I paid his car insurance for 4 months when he couldn't cover it. Every time, he swore he'd pay me back as soon as his next big thing took off. Spoiler alert, it never took off, and I never saw that money again. But he was my brother. You know, that's what family does. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I enabled his Peter Pan lifestyle. I met Tessa about 2 years ago at a friend's barbecue. She was 27. We moved in together after about 8 months. Yeah, maybe fast for some, but when you know, you know. Or so I thought. Turns out I didn't know jack. Tessa got along great with my family. My parents loved her because she would actually engage with their stories and ask questions instead of just politely nodding. She'd help my mom in the kitchen, talk sports with my dad, the whole deal. And Brandon, well, Brandon thought she was great. At first, I thought it was nice that my girlfriend and my brother got along. How naive I was. Looking back now, with the 2020 clarity of hindsight, I can see the signs I missed. The way Brandon always found an excuse to stop by our apartment when he knew I was at work. How Tessa started bringing up Brandon's latest business idea at dinner, showing way more interest in his half-baked plans than I ever did. The inside jokes I wasn't a part of. The way she'd defend him when I'd get frustrated about him flaking on plans or asking for money again. But I trusted her. I trusted them both. That was my mistake. It all came crashing down 6 months ago, on a random Tuesday. I had been working overtime because we were about to launch a major update to our platform, one of those projects that involved late nights, working weekends, the whole grind. Tessa said she understood, that she was proud of me for being so dedicated. Brandon had recently moved into an apartment about 15 minutes from ours after his latest roommate situation fell apart. Surprise, surprise. One day, I came home early, around 2 p.m., because a meeting got canceled and I figured I'd surprise Tessa. Maybe we could have lunch together, since she was working from home that week. I opened the door quietly, so I wouldn't interrupt her if she was on a call. The apartment was silent. Too silent. No sound of typing on her keyboard, no music she usually played while she worked. I walked toward the bedroom, thinking maybe she was taking a nap. The door was cracked open, and that's when I heard it. I heard them, my girlfriend and my brother, in my bed, in the condo that I paid for. You know that feeling when your brain refuses to process what's happening? Like there has to be a rational explanation, some misunderstanding, because surely the 2 people you trust most in the world wouldn't do this to you. That lasted for about 3 seconds before reality hit me like a freight train. The sounds were unmistakable, not just the physical act, but the way they were talking to each other. Intimate, familiar nicknames I'd never heard Tessa use. I felt my stomach drop like I'd been punched, but weirdly, in that moment, I didn't feel rage. I just felt a cold, clear certainty. This is who they are. This is what they chose. I didn't storm and screaming. I didn't make a scene. I stood there for a moment, listening, letting the full weight of the betrayal settle in. Then I turned around, walked back to the living room, and sat down on my couch. My couch, in my apartment, while my brother was with my girlfriend. Part of me wanted to kick the door in and confront them, to make them feel as exposed and humiliated as I did. But I didn't. That's not me. I'm the guy who thinks things through, the one who stays calm when everything is going wrong, the one who makes calculated decisions instead of emotional ones. It's what separated me from Brandon my whole life. So I wasn't going to change now just because he'd proven once again that he was exactly the selfish person I'd always been covering for. I sat there for about 20 minutes, just breathing, thinking, getting my head straight. I could hear them finish, then talking quietly, laughing about something. That casual intimacy was somehow worse than the physical act. This wasn't a one-time incident or a moment of weakness. This was comfortable, familiar. This had been going on for a while. Finally, I heard the shower turn on. Good. That meant Brandon was probably getting ready to leave. I waited. And sure enough, about 45 minutes after I got home, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. Brandon walked into the living room wearing yesterday's clothes, his hair still damp from the shower, looking at his phone with a smug smile on his face. He looked up and saw me sitting there. His expression went from smug satisfaction to pure terror in half a second. I watched the color drain from his face. Dude, bro. Save it, I said. My voice was calm, unnervingly so. I think I surprised both of us with how steady I sounded. Brandon just stood there, frozen. Then I heard Tessa's voice from the bedroom. Babe, did you leave your? She stopped mid-sentence as she came into the hallway and saw me sitting there. Logan, she started to say. I held up a hand. No, just don't. The three of us just stood there for a moment. I saw them exchange a look, some kind of silent communication that made it crystal clear this wasn't the first time. They had a rhythm, a dynamic. This was a relationship. How long? I asked, looking at Tessa. She couldn't meet my eyes. Logan, I wanted to tell you. How long? 3 months, Brandon said. At least he had the guts to answer. Maybe 4. For months. For a third of our relationship, they had been doing this behind my back. All those nights I was working late, all those times Brandon casually dropped by, all those inside jokes. It was all right there, and I had been too trusting to see it. I thought about every time I came home to find Brandon's jacket hanging by the door. Oh, he just stopped by to drop something off. Every time I noticed Tessa was in a weirdly good mood on days I knew Brandon had been over. Every excuse, every explanation, every lie. They had been playing me for a fool this whole time. Logan, please, Tessa said, her voice cracking. Let me explain what happened. It wasn't supposed to. It wasn't supposed to what? Last for 4 months? You weren't supposed to be with my brother in my bed while I was at work paying for this apartment? The words came out cold, clinical. I wasn't yelling. That would have required me to care enough to be angry. I was already past that. I was in that state of absolute clarity where you see everything exactly as it is. No illusions or wishful thinking. Brandon actually flinched at my tone. Good. He should feel uncomfortable. He should feel like an absolute piece of garbage. Though knowing Brandon, he'd probably find a way to make himself the victim in this story by tomorrow. I can explain. Tessa started, moving toward me. No, you can't, I said. There's nothing to explain. You two have been together for months in my home, in my bed, while I was working to pay for this place. That's pretty clear. It's not what you think, Brandon tried. Oh, this should be good. Enlighten me, little brother. Tell me how you accidentally tripped and fell into my girlfriend repeatedly over the course of 4 months. He actually seemed annoyed by my sarcasm, as if I were the one being unreasonable. Look, man, we didn't plan for this. It just happened. We connected, you know? Like, really connected. Connected, I repeated slowly, letting each word hang in the air. Yes, Tessa said, finding her voice. Logan, you've been so distant lately, always working, always tired. Brandon and I just started talking, and we just... Oh, so it's my fault now for working. Interesting angle. That's not what she means, Brandon said, stepping forward as if he were going to mediate. Look, I know this is wrong. I know it looks awful, but you have to understand, what Tessa and I have is real. This isn't just some random hookup. We're serious about this. And there it was. The audacity. The pure, unmitigated audacity of my brother, standing in my living room, fresh from being with my girlfriend, telling me they're serious. Serious, I said flatly. Yeah, man. Look, I know there's that whole bros before hoes thing, but that doesn't apply when you're actually serious about someone. That rule is for casual stuff. What Tessa and I have is bigger than that. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity of him trying to justify betrayal with a twisted reinterpretation of the bro code was so ridiculous that laughing was the only reaction that made sense. You think bros before hoes doesn't apply because you fell in love while stabbing me in the back? That's your argument. Don't be like that, Tessa said. We didn't want to hurt you. We tried to fight it, but what? Your feelings were just too strong? You couldn't help yourselves? Give me a break. You're both adults. You made choices every single time. For 4 months, you both chose to betray me. Brandon ran a hand through his hair, that gesture he does when he's frustrated. I knew you wouldn't get it. You've always been so black and white about everything. Sometimes things aren't black and white, Logan. Sometimes life is complicated. You're right, I said, getting to my feet. Life is complicated. But this is actually pretty simple. You're both dishonest human beings who betrayed me, and now you're both getting the hell out of my apartment. Logan, let's just talk about this, Tessa pleaded. We can work this out. We're adults. There is nothing to work out. You want to be with Brandon? Great. Congratulations. You deserve each other. But you're going to do it somewhere else. You have 1 hour to pack your essentials, Tessa. The rest of your things, I'll have in boxes by this weekend. You can coordinate a pickup with my assistant. Your assistant? Logan, come on. I'm not discussing this with you directly ever again. From now on, everything goes through a third party. Brandon, you were on your way out anyway, so that's convenient. And just so we're clear, you're both out of my life. Brandon actually looked hurt, like I'd said something cruel. Dude, I'm your brother. No, brothers don't do this. You're just a guy who shares some of my DNA and a childhood home. That's it. We're done. You can't just cut us out of your life, Tessa said, actually crying now. Classic. Watch me. I walked to the bedroom, grabbed my laptop and work bag, and headed for the door. I paused and turned to look at them, both standing there in my living room, looking lost. 1 hour, Tessa. After that, I'm changing the locks. Brandon, do me a favor and take your soulmate somewhere else. Maybe one of those apartments I helped you pay for. Oh wait, you got evicted from those. Well, that's your problem now. I walked out of my own apartment because I couldn't stand to be in the same space as them for another second. I went to my friend Ethan's place and crashed on his couch while I figured out my next move. Ethan, bless his heart, didn't ask questions. He just handed me a controller, and we played video games for 3 hours while I processed everything. Eventually, I told him what happened. His response was, "Damn, bro, that's messed up. What are you going to do? Cut them off completely. Move on. Live my life. That's it. They want to be together? They can have each other. I'm not wasting another second of my life on either one of them." Ethan looked at me, expecting the emotional breakdown, the rage, the tears. But they never came. I just felt this weird calm, like I had been holding my breath for months and finally let it out. Something had been off in my relationship for a long time. I knew it on some level, but couldn't put my finger on it. Now I knew what it was, and knowing, somehow, made it easier to deal with. "You're taking this surprisingly well," Ethan said. "What's the alternative? Cry? Beg her to choose me over my brother? Try to salvage something with Brandon just because we share DNA? Forget that. They showed me exactly who they are. I'm choosing to believe them." "I am furious," I said. "So angry I can barely think straight. But I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of seeing it. I'm not going to waste energy on drama or revenge plots or trying to make them feel guilty. The best revenge is cutting them off and living well. So that's what I'm going to do." And I meant it. And that's exactly what I did. The first week was tough, I'm not going to lie. Not because I missed Tessa. Believe me, you get over someone pretty quickly when you find out they're a disloyal person, but because my whole life was structured around her. Our routines, our plans, our future. All of that evaporated in one afternoon, and I had to rebuild from scratch. I threw myself into work. I took on extra projects, volunteered for the difficult tasks nobody wanted. I started working out every morning before work, just to channel the frustration. And I started therapy, because I'm not an idiot and I knew I needed to process this whole thing properly. Tessa tried to contact me multiple times that first month. Texts, calls, emails, she even showed up at my work once. Security escorted her out. Every message was some variation of, "We need to talk," "I made a mistake," or my personal favorite, "Brandon isn't who I thought he was." I blocked her on everything. I had my lawyer send a cease and desist letter when she wouldn't stop. Brandon was quieter. He sent one long text about a week after it all blew up. It was full of justifications and explanations about how they tried to fight their feelings, how they never meant to hurt me, how he hoped one day I could forgive him and we could be brothers again, how family is supposed to forgive. I read it once, then deleted it and didn't reply. What was there to say? My parents found out about 2 weeks into the mess. I didn't tell them, but of course Brandon did, probably spinning it to make himself look less terrible. They called me, frantic, asking what happened, why I wasn't answering Brandon's calls, if we could all sit down and talk about this as a family. There's nothing to talk about, I told my father. Brandon was with Tessa for months while I was at work. They're together now. I'm moving on. End of story. But he's your brother, Logan. Family works things out. No, Dad. Family doesn't betray family. Brandon made his choice. He chose Tessa over our relationship. That's his right. But it's my right to permanently remove them both from my life. I'm done being the understanding older brother who has to forgive everything because it's family. You're being too harsh, my mother said on the other line. People make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. This was 4 months of deliberate choices. Every single time they were together, they chose to betray me. That's not a mistake. That's who they are. Brandon says you won't even talk to him. My dad tried. Correct. I have nothing to say to him. Logan, please. I'm not asking you to pick sides. Brandon is your son, and I get that. But I'm your son, too. And I'm asking you to respect my decision. I don't want to talk about Brandon. I don't want updates on his life. I don't want to hear about him and Tessa. He doesn't exist to me. If you can't respect that boundary, then we're going to have a problem. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, my dad said, "We just want our family to be whole again." Then you should have raised a son who knew how to be a decent brother. I'll talk to you guys soon, but Brandon is an off-limits topic. I mean it. I hung up before they could argue. They tried to mediate a few more times, but I held firm. Eventually, they got the message. My parents and I still talk, but there's a Brandon-shaped hole in all of our conversations now. They don't bring him up, and I sure as hell don't ask. Here's what I learned. Some people treat your boundaries like they're a negotiation. They test them, they push them, they try to guilt you into lowering them. The key is consistency. You don't have to get angry about it. You don't have to explain yourself over and over. You just hold the line and let them deal with how they feel about it. But the real story, the part that might bring a sense of justice? What happened to Brandon and Tessa after I cut them out of my life? Turns out, the fantasy they had built in their heads about their serious relationship came crashing down pretty fast when reality set in. I heard all of this secondhand from mutual friends who, despite my best efforts to avoid gossip, felt the need to keep me updated. Problem 1. Neither of them had any money. Tessa made a decent salary, but she had been living in my mostly paid-for condo, chipping in maybe $200 a month for groceries. Brandon was still between his various schemes, meaning he made maybe $500 a month on a good month. Together, they could barely afford a shabby one-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town. Apparently, the first place they looked at had pests, the second had mold in the bathroom, and a landlord with serious serial killer vibes. They ended up in some complex on the east side with paper-thin walls and neighbors selling drugs out of apartment 12B. Very romantic. Nothing says true love like a security deposit you can barely scrape together. Problem 2. It turns out when your entire relationship is built on the thrill of sneaking around and betraying someone, the spark fades pretty fast once you're out in the open. Who would have thought? The forbidden nature of it was what made it exciting. The stolen glances, the secret moments, the adrenaline of almost getting caught. Take all that away, and what are you left with? 2 people who have to actually live together and deal with real life. Like whose turn it is to buy toilet paper, and why can't Brandon hold down a job for more than 6 weeks? My friend Caleb ran into them at a grocery store about 2 months after it all blew up. He said they were arguing in the frozen food aisle over money, both looking stressed and miserable. Brandon was trying to convince Tessa to lend him money for some new plan, and she was refusing. That magical connection they had wasn't looking so magical anymore. Caleb said Tessa looked like she had aged 5 years and 2 months. Hair in a messy bun, no makeup, wearing sweats that had seen better days. Brandon was wearing the same outfit Caleb had seen him in the week before. Not the same style, the exact same clothes. They were living the authentic broke life now. No safety net. No responsible older brother to bail Brandon out. No boyfriend with a stable home for Tessa to live in comfortably. Problem 3. Tessa's friends dropped her. Turns out, most people don't love hanging out with someone who had an inappropriate relationship with their boyfriend's brother. Who knew actions have social consequences? Her Instagram went from constant posts about living my truth and following my heart to basically nothing. The girl was completely iced out by her entire social circle. Problem 4. My family never really accepted them as a couple. My parents were cordial to Tessa when Brandon brought her around, but it was that cold politeness that's somehow worse than open hostility. They knew what she did to me. They knew what Brandon had done. And as much as they wanted the family together, they couldn't pretend to be happy about the relationship that had torn it apart. Problem 5, and this is my favorite. Brandon is a terrible boyfriend when he's actually required to be a consistent partner. All that charm and fun energy he has works great for sneaking around and having an affair. It's terrible for dealing with actual relationship stuff like bills, commitment, future plans, and emotional support. Tessa thought she was trading the distant, workaholic provider for the fun, romantic brother. What she actually got was a man-child who couldn't hold a job and thought social media likes were a viable career path. 6 months after they got together, I heard through the grapevine that Tessa was trying to get her old job back at a different company after leaving hers. Apparently, word had gotten around her office about the situation, and the work environment became uncomfortable, which, in corporate speak, means everyone thought she was untrustworthy and treated her accordingly. Brandon, meanwhile, had burned through another 3 business ideas and was back to asking my parents for money. They helped him a few times before my dad finally said no. I guess that happens when you're not the golden child anymore and have to face actual consequences. By the 8-month mark, I heard they were fighting constantly. The relationship that was so real and too strong to deny was now just 2 miserable people stuck in a barely affordable apartment, resenting each other and realizing they had blown up their lives for basically nothing. I want to be clear, I didn't orchestrate any of this. I didn't sabotage them or secretly plot their downfall. I literally just cut them out and moved on. They destroyed themselves. It turns out that relationships built on betrayal tend to have a pretty shaky foundation. Who knew? Meanwhile, my life got demonstrably better. I got promoted at work about 4 months after the breakup. All that extra effort I had been putting in paid off. Senior software engineer with a 30% raise and a title that actually meant something. I was finally getting recognition for my skills, not just for being the reliable guy who always shows up. I started dating again around the 6-month mark. Nothing serious at first, just meeting people and getting my head on straight about what I wanted in a partner, now that I was crystal clear on what I didn't want. I met a woman named Sabrina through a hiking group I joined. She's a project manager for a construction company. She has her own place, pays her own bills, and has zero tolerance for drama. We've been seeing each other for 3 months, and it's just easy, comfortable. No sneaking around, no lies, no wondering if I can trust her. I bought a house, a real house, 3 bedrooms, a nice yard, in a good neighborhood. I've been spending my weekends fixing it up, making it exactly what I want. My space. No shared history with anyone else. Just mine. The house was a foreclosure that needed work. Most people saw a mess. I saw potential. I spent 3 months on renovations, putting in new floors, updating the kitchen, completely redoing the master bath. I learned how to lay tile from watching YouTube videos. I built custom shelving in the garage and planted a garden in the backyard. Every improvement was satisfying in a way that had nothing to do with impressing anyone else. This was for me, my sanctuary, one that no one could taint with betrayal or lies. The first night I slept in my house, in my bedroom that no one else had ever set foot in, on a bed with no history attached. I slept better than I had in years. No anxiety, no worries, no subconscious warnings that something was wrong. Just peace. I reconnected with some friends I had drifted from during my relationship with Tessa. It turns out that when your girlfriend is secretly involved with your brother, You subconsciously isolate yourself because deep down you know something is wrong, but you can't name it. Without that toxicity in my life, I was free to build real friendships again. I started a weekly poker night with 5 guys I'd known since college but hadn't spent real time with in years. We'd order pizza, talk, and play cards until midnight. Simple. No drama. No one was in an inappropriate relationship with anyone else's girlfriend or trying to justify betrayal with romantic word salads. Just uncomplicated friendship. I joined a men's soccer league on Sundays. I hadn't played since high school, but it felt good to run, to be part of a team, to have something physical to pour all the energy into that I used to waste worrying about my relationship. We weren't good. We lost more games than we won. But that wasn't the point. The point was showing up, being present, and building connections with people who had no link to my past drama. My mental health soared. The anxiety I had been dealing with for months before the breakup vanished. I'd thought it was work stress, but looking back, it was my subconscious screaming at me that something was deeply wrong in my relationship. My body knew before my mind did. About a year after it all went down, I was in the grocery store, and I ran into Brandon. Literally almost collided with him in the produce section. He looked rough, thinner, tired, wearing clothes I remembered him buying years ago. That go-getter energy he used to have was gone, replaced by a defeated exhaustion. We made eye contact. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something. I just walked right past him like he was a stranger. Because to me he was. A stranger who happened to share some DNA and childhood memories. I saw him out of the corner of my eye, just standing there, watching me walk away. Part of me wondered if he expected me to turn back, to acknowledge him, to give him a chance to apologize or explain or whatever. But I just kept walking. I bought my groceries, went back to my house, cooked dinner for Sabrina, who came over later, and lived my life. No anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all, really. Just neutral indifference. That's how I knew I was truly over it. He wasn't even worth the energy to dislike anymore. I found out from my mom, who sometimes can't help herself, that Brandon and Tessa broke up about 14 months after they got together. Apparently, it was a disaster. Lots of screaming, accusations, and blame thrown back and forth. Tessa moved back in with her parents. Brandon moved back in with mine. Both single, both struggling, both dealing with the fallout of their choices. My mom told me all this on a call, then she went quiet. Finally, she said, "I think Brandon wants to reach out to you, to apologize." "Tell him not to bother," I replied. "I'm not interested." "Logan, he's your brother. He made a mistake." "No, Mom. He made hundreds of mistakes, one every single time he chose to betray me, and then tried to justify it with some nonsense about how it didn't count because he fell in love. He made his choices. I made mine. We're done. Don't you think you've punished him enough?" That actually made me laugh. I haven't punished him at all. I simply removed myself from his life. He's punishing himself just by being who he is. That's not my problem to solve. He's having a really hard time, Logan. Good. The word came out harder than I intended, but I didn't take it back. Because it was true. Good. I'm glad he's miserable. I'm glad the consequence for his actions is a miserable life. I'm glad the fantasy he and Tessa built about their grand love story turned into a nightmare. You make poor choices, you deal with the outcome. But mostly, I'm just glad I'm not a part of it. I'm glad I had the self-respect to cut them both off immediately. I'm glad I didn't waste months or years trying to forgive or understand or maintain some twisted version of a relationship for the sake of family. The truth is, Brandon didn't just have an affair with my girlfriend. He showed me exactly who he was. Someone capable of betraying his own brother for his own gratification and then trying to rewrite the narrative to make himself the victim or the romantic hero. Someone who thought, "I fell in love," was an excuse for months of calculated deceit. And Tessa showed me she was someone who would rather sneak around with my brother than have one adult conversation about being unhappy in our relationship. Someone who was perfectly comfortable living off my income and stability while looking for a thrill elsewhere. Someone who valued the rush of a forbidden romance over basic human decency and respect for the person she claimed to love. They both, really, did me a favor. They removed themselves from my life in the most definitive way possible. They made it easy for me to walk away with no self-doubt, no mixed signals, no gray areas, no, but maybe they deserve another chance. Just a clear, bright line that showed me exactly who they were and gave me permission to move on, guilt-free. The last I heard, Brandon was working retail somewhere. Tessa was in a relationship with some guy she met on a dating app, and apparently, it wasn't going well. They both tried to contact me on social media a few months ago. Him with a long message about how he's grown and changed. Her with a short, "I'm sorry for everything." I deleted both without replying. Sabrina knows the whole story. I told her on our 4th date because I figured she should know what she was getting into. Her response was, "Good for you for standing up for yourself." A lot of guys would have stayed and tried to make it work or forgiven way too fast because they're afraid of being alone. She got the point completely. It was never about revenge or punishment or making them suffer. It was about respecting myself enough to walk away from people who proved they didn't respect me. My parents have slowly started to come around to my point of view. They still wish things were different, that their family was whole again, but they've stopped pushing for a reconciliation. My dad admitted to me a few months ago that he was disappointed in Brandon, that he'd enabled too much of his behavior over the years, and that maybe if they had held him accountable sooner, none of this would have happened. I didn't say, "I told you so." There was no point. The lesson was learned the hard way, and nobody needed me to rub it in. Comment. Sometimes, the most powerful form of self-love is choosing to walk away from a situation that no longer serves you. It's about recognizing that your peace of mind is not up for negotiation. Setting firm boundaries isn't an act of punishment toward others, but an act of kindness to yourself. True healing begins when you stop waiting for an apology and start creating your own closure. You learn that the best response to betrayal isn't revenge, but building a life so full and joyful that the past loses its power. I hope this reminds you that you have the strength to rebuild, even when it feels impossible. Always choose the path that leads to your own well-being and inner calm. You are the one who decides who has a place in your life. Remember to be patient and kind with yourself through the process. Your future deserves to be built on a foundation of respect and trust. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.